through to the kitchen, and finally hung suspended a few feet from the ceiling. The army bread bakers stared up at him with faces as white as fear and flour could make them. The commandant of the camp rushed in. He asked, "What have you done with the corpse?" The bread bakers pointed to Matthews, who apologized for his bad choice of landing ground. He was hardly scratched. Mac lost his way in the clouds and landed near a small village for gasoline and information. The information he had easily, but gasoline was scarce. After laborious search through several neighboring villages, he found a supply and had it carried to the field where his machine was waiting. Some farmer lads agreed to hold on to the tail while Mac started the engine. At the first roar of the rotary motor they all let loose. The Beloit pushed Matt contemptuously aside, lifted its tail, and rushed away. He followed it over a level tract of country miles in extent and found it at last in a ditch, nose down, tail in the air, like a duck hunting bugs in the mud. The story loses 9/10 of its interest for want of Mac's pungent method of telling it. One of the bona fide godchildren of chance was Millard. The circumstances leading to his engagement in the French service as a member of the Franco-American Corps proves this. Millard was a real human being. He had no grammar, no polish, no razor, safety or otherwise, but likewise no pretense, no swank. He was persona non grata to a few, but the great majority liked him very much, although they wondered how in the name of all that is curious he had ever decided to join the French air service. Once he told us his history at great length. He had been a scout in the Philippine service of the American army. He had been a roustabout on cattle boats. He had boiled his coffee down by stockyards in every sizable town and every transcontinental railroad in America. In the spring of 1916 he had employment with a roofing company which had contracted for a job in Richmond, Virginia, I think it was. But Richmond went dry in the state elections, and the roofing job fell through, owing, so Millard insisted, to the unnatural and inevitable depression which follows a dry election. Having lost his prospective employment as a roofer, what more natural than that he should turn to this other high calling? He was game. He tried hard, and at last reached his brevet test. 3 times he started off on triangles. No one expected to see him return, but he surprised them every time. He could never find the towns where he was supposed to land, so he would keep on going till his gas gave out. Then his machine would come down on itself, and Millard would crawl out from under the wreckage and come back by train. "I don't know," he would say doubtfully, rubbing his 8 days' growth of beard. "I'm seeing a lot of France, but this coming down business ain't what it's cracked up to be. I can swing in on the rods of a box car with the train going hell-bent for election, but I guess I'm too old to learn to fly." The War Office came to this opinion after Millard had smashed 3 machines in 3 tries. Wherever he may be now, I am sure that chance is still ruling his destiny, and I hope, with all my heart, benevolently. Our final triangle was completed uneventfully. J.B.'s motor behaved splendidly. I remembered my biograph at every stage of the journey, and we were home again within 3 hours. We did our altitude test, and were then no longer élèves pilotes, but pilotes aviateurs. By reason of this distinction, we passed from the rank of soldier of the second class to that of corporal. At the tailor shop the wings and star insignia were sewn upon our collars and our corporal stripes upon our sleeves, for we were proud, as every aviator is proud who reaches the end of his apprenticeship and enters into the dignity of a brevetted military pilot. 6 months have passed since I made the last entry in my journal. J.B. was asleep in his historic bed, and I was sitting at a rickety table writing by candlelight, stopping now and then to listen to the mutter of guns on the Aisne front. It was only at night that we could hear them, and then not often. The very ghost of sound, as faint as the beating of the pulses in one's ears. That was a May evening, and this one late November. I arrived at Gare du Nord only a few hours ago. Never before have I come to Paris with a finer sense of the joy of living. I walked down the Rue Lafayette, through the Rue de Provence, the Rue du Havre, to a little hotel in the vicinity of the Gare St. Laurent. Under ordinary circumstances none of these streets, nor the people in them, would have appeared particularly interesting. But on this occasion it was the finest walk of my life. I saw everything with the eyes of the permissionaire, and sniffed the odors of roasting chestnuts, of restaurants, of shops, of people never so keenly aware of their numberless variety. After dinner I walked out on the boulevards of the Madeleine to the Place de la République, through the maze of narrow streets to the river, and over to Point Neuf, to Notre Dame. I was surprised that the spell which Hugo gives it should have lost none of its old potency for me after coming direct from the realities of modern warfare. If he were writing this journal, what a story it would be! It will be necessary to pass rapidly over the period between the day when we received our brevets militaires and that upon which we started for the front. The event which bulked largest to us was, of course, the departure on active service. Preceding it, and next in importance, was the last phase of our training, and the culmination of it all, at the School of Acrobacy. Preliminary to our work there, we had a 6-week course of instruction, first on the twin-motor Caudron, and then on various types of Nieuport biplane. We thought the Caudron a magnificent machine. We liked the steady throb of its powerful motors, the enormous spread of its wings, the slow, ponderous way it had of answering to the controls. It was our business to take officer observers for long trips about the country, while they made photographs, spotted dummy batteries, and perfected themselves in the wireless code. At that time the Caudron had almost passed its period of usefulness at the front, and there was a prospect of our being transferred to a yet larger and more powerful Littored, a 3-passenger biplane carrying 2 machine-gunners beside the pilot, and from 3 to 5 machine guns. This appealed to us mightily. J.B. was always talking of the time when he would command not only a machine, but also a gang of men. However, being Americans and recruited for a particular combat corps which flies only single-seater avions de chasse, we eventually followed the usual course of training for such pilots. We passed in turn to the Nieuport biplane, which compares in speed and grace with those larger craft as the flight of a swallow with the movements of a great, lazy buzzard. And now the Nieuport has been surpassed and almost entirely supplanted by the Spad, of 140, 180, 200, and 230 horsepower, and we have transferred our allegiance to each in turn, marveling at the genius of the French in motor and aircraft construction. At last we were ready for acrobacy. I will not give an account of the trials by means of which one's ability as a combat pilot is most severely tested. This belongs among the pages of a textbook, rather than in those of a journal of this kind. But to us, who were to undergo the ordeal, for it is an ordeal for the untrained pilot, our typewritten notes on acrobacy read like the pages of a fascinating romance. A year or two ago these aerial maneuvers would have been thought impossible. Now we were all to do them as a matter of routine training. The worst of it was that our civilian pursuits offered no criterion upon which to base forecast of our ability as acrobats. There was J.B., for example. He knew a mixed metaphor when he saw one, for he had had wide experience with them as an English instructor at a New England prep school, but he had never done a barrel turn or anything resembling it. How was he to know what his reaction would be to this bewildering maneuver, a series of rapid horizontal corkscrew turns? And to what use could I put my hazy knowledge of Massachusetts statutes dealing with neglect and non-support of family, in that exciting moment when, for the first time, I should be whirling earthward in a spinning nose-dive? Accidents and fatalities were most frequent at the School of Acrobacy, for the reason that one could not know beforehand whether he would be able to keep his head when the earth gone mad, spinning like a top, standing on one rim, turning upside down. In the end we all mastered it after a fashion, for the tests are by no means so difficult of accomplishment as they appear to be. Up to this time, November 28, 1917, there had been but one American killed at it in French schools. We were not all good acrobats. One must have a knack for it. which many of us will never be able to acquire. The French